Hey everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Food Addiction Recovery Week on Chef AJ Live. My guest today literally wrote the book on food addiction because her book is called Processed Food Addiction. She also wrote another amazing book, really, that was the start of me understanding this disease, called Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Sick, and Fat. Please welcome Dr. Joan Ifland. You can't do a week or a summit about food addiction without having you on it. That's for sure.
Bless your heart. I appreciate that. I've been at this for 26 years, but it was writing the textbook that really showed me this is usually a severe addiction and we're deeply traumatized by it. So it's just, we're going to add to that understanding today.
It's amazing how many people just still don't believe it.
Yeah. But people are becoming more and more open to it, I believe, because the list of things they haven't tried yet is getting shorter and shorter. And the sad thing is that people might think that they've gone down through that list and nothing has worked because there's something wrong with them. No, it's because there was something missing from the programs. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, did you want to jump right into your presentation?
Let's do it. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that is being brought to light by researchers at University of California, San Francisco. It's that is where the tobacco inside documents began to be deposited when the tobacco companies started losing their court cases. The courts required them to deposit inside documents at University of California, San Francisco. And the depository now has millions of documents in it, but some very excellent researchers are going through those documents and they are pulling out shocking revelations, such as the detailed way that the tobacco companies use tobacco marketing, addiction marketing practices in sugar for children. So they knew that they were addicting people. They are masters of addiction, and they brought that technology and very specific techniques into marketing sugar for children. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So, oh, no.
Uh-oh.
You'll just have to cut this out.
Okay.
Why are we talking about this? It's because this has become an epidemic. In 2018, this is even before COVID, Americans were already consuming 73% of their calories in addictive processed foods. Half of all American adult deaths are from a diet-related disease. That is 1.5 million people a year. People are dying from processed foods 4 times faster than they're dying from COVID. It took 4 years for us to get to 1.5 million deaths in the US from COVID, but 1.5 million people die every year from these diet-related diseases. 82% of Americans are overweight or obese as of 2018. So this is clearly not your fault. When you have millions, literally 300 million, 400 million, more than 300 million people, all suffering the same thing, this is not individual responsibility. This is the work of the tactics that you are about to see. So what is the evidence for addiction in processed foods? Like, how do you know that sugar is an addictive substance and it's not a food? Well, there are very specific things that researchers look for to determine that very thing. Is this an addictive substance or is it a food? And sugars, we have demonstrations of 2 key indicators of addiction, which is progressive use. If you give rats sugar, they will eat more and more of it over time. And if you take it away from them, they will go into a withdrawal syndrome, very similar to morphine withdrawal. With flour, we have some new research showing loss of control and cravings. Those are two more indicators that this is an addiction. With gluten, we have good research showing that gluteomorphine attaches to opiate receptors. So they're activating the same part of the brain that's activated by opium. Excessive salt, a new study showing a withdrawal syndrome. Dairy, there is casomorphine in dairy, and it attaches to opiate receptors. Dairy is a product that's designed to put a baby calf to sleep. It's a pretty potent narcotic. And processed fats, we do have new research also here showing that rats will eat more fat over time. And then caffeine. And we have 4 diagnoses in the diagnostic manual for mental illness related to caffeine. So caffeine is a powerful destructive drug. So let's look at sugar. Sugar is highly addictive. We're focusing on sugar today because the tobacco industry focused on sugar for children. They have their own addiction researchers, and those addiction scientists chose sugar for children, a wide open market with devastating consequences. Rats will choose sugar and saccharin over cocaine and heroin. That is how addictive sugar is. And sweet tastes create an associative cue so that any sweet taste can trigger an intense reaction. So this is the substance that we're dealing with. You can just start thinking, sugar is not a food, sugar is a sweet tasting drug. And then you will get this. Now, how prevalent is this? This is something, why should we pay attention to this? It's because we have, and you see these studies on this page are all new. They're all from 2020. We have new evidence that 6 addictive behaviors are showing up in obese populations. So I don't think of obese populations as obese. I think of them having been given, without their agreement, without their knowledge, an addiction, a severe addiction to processed foods. So here are the criteria, here are the behaviors that are showing up to tell us that the addiction is rampant and common in obese and overweight populations. Unintended use. That means you have a plan, you're going to only eat so much, and then you eat more. Happens all the time. Failure to cut back. We see that almost 100% of people regain their weight or start to regain some part of their weight lost within 3 years. Increasing use, and this is a population study, that the percentage of processed foods being consumed by Americans is increasing. Cravings, very prevalent in overweight and obese populations. Use in spite of consequences. This is a new study that showed that 48% of Americans gained weight through COVID. So in spite of screaming headlines that overweight, obese people were dying, people continued to gain weight. That's a really severe addiction where you are facing death and you're still eating this or ingesting or using the substances. And use for reasons other than hunger. This just means that you're not eating to stop hunger, you're eating to avoid withdrawal. And this new study by Jane is about finding that people who are in negative relationships gain more weight. The idea being that they are eating more to console themselves about the relationship or manage the pain of the relationship. But that's not eating, that's drug use. Okay, and here is the kicker. You only need 6 out of the 11 criteria. You only need to be experiencing 6 of these behaviors to reach the threshold for a severe addiction. And this is why I say this over and over again. This is a severe addiction, which means it's very hard to put into remission. Okay, so what we're going to do today is just part one. We're going to look at tobacco and sugar marketing tactics, and we're going to hopefully schedule another time to look at what these tactics actually did to our brains, and then how to redesign recovery for a severe addiction. Okay, here are the tactics. One, this is the process by which these corporations addict people. You hide the addictive substance in a seemingly innocent product. And we're going to look at examples of each of these. Two, you create coupon programs, reward programs, so that people will use the hidden drugs in this seemingly innocent product enough times to create the addiction. You're setting in the addiction. You're teaching reward cells to crave. In step three, you give the product fantasy values. You make the product about something else, so that people are not aware that they are developing an addiction, and they identify with the product, they want to use the product. And then in step four, you surround the user with cues. Now that you have an addicted brain to create profit for you, you want to stimulate those addicted brain cells to release cravings. So you surround the person with triggers, stimulation, reminders, signals. It's diabolical. Okay, so here's some examples of how addiction merchants hide addictive substances in the products. Extra nicotine in vaping products. Extra alcohol in products that are being sold as low alcohol. This is a great study. The guy went in, measured the actual alcohol versus the amount of alcohol being claimed on the label, and there was more alcohol in the product, hidden extra addictive substances. And then, of course, we all know the tragic story of hiding the addictive nature of the opiates in painkillers marketed to doctors. This is a business model. You did not ask for this. This is not regulated by our government effectively. And this is how we develop addictions. And it doesn't have anything to do with our willpower, our childhood issues. We may suffer childhood issues because our parents are addicted. We may suffer childhood issues because we're addicted as children. But there is a chemical reaction going on in the brain that has to be dealt with separately from the childhood issues. Okay, now here we get to food. How did they do this with food? Well, they upped the amount of sugar in processed foods. They marketed high fructose corn syrup as a food. You could make entire things out of high fructose corn syrup and then call it a food. Sugar in children's drinks, and here's the study that I'm really talking about, Nugent 2019, that we're going to be pulling a lot of information from today. And then sugar, fat, salt in processed foods. This is not an academic citation. Moss 2013 is the book, Sugar, Fat, Salt, by Michael Moss, and Chef AJ has interviewed him. It was a fantastic interview. So examples are very high levels of salt and fat in Lunchables, a child's product, sugar in tomato sauce, salt in canned vegetables. Those substances don't need to be there. They are there to make the product more addictive. Okay, now, persuade users to try the product, to use the product often enough to create the cravings, and then you start developing that irrational urge to use. So how do they do this? Oh, purchase points for free rewards. We're going to look a lot at that today. Try new flavors. packages of multiple servings, these family packs. So there's just a lot of it there in your house, and you just naturally eat it more often. Coupons, buy one, get one free, discounts and limited time sales. So buy it now and then use a lot of it, because if you can get them to use it in a concentrated period of time, that addiction will set in. And then tastings, and of course, deceptive values of claims. We just had a court case where Cliff's Bar was putting nutritious on the bar. The bar is 30% sugar. And a wonderful lawyer named Jack Fitzgerald went after them and won. That's an incredibly deceptive claim of value. And there's the whole team. That citation, I know you can't see it, but it's Nugent, Glantz, Palmer, and Schmidt. Tobacco industry involvement in children's sugary drinks market. A lot of what we're going to see today is from that study. Again, remember, that study, these things that I'm showing you are from tobacco internal documents. These are how they're communicating with each other inside the company about addicting children to sugar. Now, step 3, remember, give the product a fantasy value to conceal harm and deepen identification. So what are the examples? Oh, this masculine Marlboro man, sexy Lauren Bacall, rebellious suffragettes. They actually told suffragettes that these are women working to get the vote for women. That if you really want to look rebellious, you would be smoking. If you really want to look as important and powerful as men, smoke like the men do. It's just horrible, just diabolical. And of course, and they're still doing it. You come a long way, baby, with the Virginia Slims. So this is a fantasy value. Cigarettes are not in the least bit sexy. They're disgusting. They are anti-sexing. You smell bad. Your mouth smells bad. Why would somebody want to kiss that mouth? It's the total opposite, but they were able to create a fantasy value, sexy, around cigarettes. Totally fake, totally false. Now, they've done the same thing with sugary drinks for children. Kool-Aid Man is an awesome dude. The Hawaiian Punch mascot, Punchy, his big deal was he hit an old man. Spider-Man selling fast food, Travis Scott's favorite fast food meal, Disney characters selling these addictive foods, selling drugs. Even I'm always sorry that I have to say this, but high on the list is the Girl Scouts selling their cookies, and cookies that have now been made into breakfast cereals. So this is ascribing a fantasy value. For children, the fantasy value is I'm stronger than adults. I have power over adults. I control adults. Or I am cool like adults. I'm cool. I'm strong like Spider-Man. I'm cool like Travis Scott. So then step 4, now that the addiction has been set in, you have lured children to using these sugary drinks. Now you surround them with triggers. So their little brains, which should be available to them to learn life skills and to connect with other children and do well in school, make learning easy. Instead, those brains are now dedicated to producing cravings. The children are surrounded with triggers that are constantly producing those cravings in their heads. Home, school, work, stores, workplaces, faith organizations, sports venues, theme parks, it's everywhere. Now these reminders are everywhere. Television, magazines, Sunday comics, book covers, toys, radios, clothing, Tumblr, wristwatches. This is just Hold on to your hats. And this was the core, this is one of the cores of tobacco marketing. And you're going to see how they adapted this to sugar for children. Free stuff reward programs, loyalty prizes and flavors, drive repeat use. Fantasy themed rewards engages the user's drive to belong. You want to be in that in crowd with Kool-Aid Man. And then free logoed stuff surrounding the addicted user with triggers. So these reward programs are just addiction machines. They did this with cigarettes. So here is that program in action for cigarettes, the Marlboro Country store, where you would buy cigarettes, you would send in your purchase points, and then you would get jackets, and you would get belt buckles, and you would get lighters for free. They brought this right over to children. Here is the wacky warehouse. I mean, this is nervy. You're creating mental illness in children. And what do you call the rewards program? The wacky warehouse? This is nervy to put a mental illness phrase on the friggin' warehouse. So these are all the kinds of things that children would be motivated to buy more and more and more sugar. This is colored flavored sugar, so that they could get these prizes. And here's how well that worked. This is an inside Philip Morris analysis, 1993. The Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse is the most effective kids marketing vehicle known. They're making children mentally ill with a drug that rats will choose over heroin and cocaine. This is an analysis bragging about how effectively they're addicting children. And then the addiction spread to adult processed foods. We know from one of the earlier slides that a person described in Michael Moss's book, Howard Moskowitz, Harvard-trained PhD in experimental psychology of marketing, developed a process where he could maximize the amount of sugar, fat, salt in processed foods while keeping it hidden. So he could get right up to that point where a consumer could detect that the product was too sweet, too salty, too fatty. And that's where that's the amount of sugar, fat, salt they would put in these products. We were sitting ducks, and our government did not protect us. So other substances, so processed foods are not the only substances that are being marketed by this model. Alcohol, opiates, prescription drugs, caffeine, vaping, cigarettes, cannabis, illegal drugs. These are all being marketed that way. And that's why there are epidemics of their use. Behaviors also can be marketed this way. Screens, social media, sex, shopping, exercise, video, gambling, and video games. And somebody recently I learned about romance novels. That's a dopamine release. Okay. So this is it. New evidence is showing us how expertly big tobacco addicted us to processed foods. This is not our fault. This is totally, totally, totally not our fault. So thank you. We are the Addiction Reset community, and let us help you. Let us train you. We're here to help. Unmute, Chef AJ.
Sorry about that. I muted because I didn't want to have any background noise. I almost feel, Dr. Ifland, we should call this diabolical.
It is diabolical. It is, I have to restrain myself all the time. I'm a professional in the field. I'm an academic. I'm a service provider. I really need to maintain my integrity and my calm demeanor. But dang, Chef AJ, this is evil.
How do they get away with it?
They bribe the regulatory agencies. They put their own people into the regulatory agencies. There was really good research and discussion of how food executives take the FDA, Food and Drug Administration jobs. It's just a revolving door. They go in for a while and then they go back to their corporations. We have a political system that is vulnerable to campaign contributions. Their lobbyists are all over Washington making these campaign contributions. We are in this for ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. Nobody is coming to save us. The doctors are not coming to save us. The dentists, the dietitians, nobody is coming to save us. But Chef AJ is coming to save us.
the ones that are savable. So Kathy, who's watching live, says, I'm not sure I understand the last slide. Tobacco industry addicted us to processed foods.
So, thank you. Let's do a little history. In the mid 1980s, the tobacco companies bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods. In the 1960s, like 1963, a tobacco company bought Hawaiian Punch. And they really experimented. They got 20 years of research and results from addicting children through Hawaiian Punch products. So yes, the tobacco companies, you've just got to ask yourself this simple question and you will see everything. And the simple question is, why would people who are expert in addiction move into processed foods? Why would people who know how to make their money from creating addiction move into processed foods? And then you see everything.
Because it's profitable, and because I think they were losing customers with smoking because people stopped smoking, a lot of people.
I think that's part of it too. They knew, we already had evidence that when people stop smoking, they start eating and gain weight. So the third piece of this, which I think is crucial, there are two more pieces. High fructose corn syrup came on the market in 1980. And before that, they were dependent on their fellow addiction merchants, the sugar cartel in Florida. So they didn't want to get into a business where their primary ingredient was, the pricing was controlled by other addiction merchants. But once high fructose corn syrup came on the market, it was very, very cheap. It was available everywhere. And that removed that barrier to getting into the business. And then the other thing that happened is we had a corrupt leader of the dietary guidelines, a researcher, a nutritionist from Harvard, whose name, Mark Hagman, who was taking money from the sugar industry. So you might remember the very first food pyramid had all refined carbohydrates at the bottom, or potatoes. And the tobacco industry, like, oh my gosh, not only are they not going to prosecute us, but they're going to help us promote these drugs. It's astonishing, but you have to believe that there was that kind of confluence, that many factors present simultaneously to create this explosion in obesity that we now have. It was not individuals. They were hiding addictive substances in our food so that we would use it often enough to establish the cravings. And then they surrounded us with triggers to release those cravings and overwhelm the rest of our brain. That is not your fault. You cannot in any way, shape, or form say that's your fault.
So here's a more practical question from Susanna, who's watching live. She says, how do I unhook my 15-year-old from sugar and dairy? He goes and buys it himself at the corner store. I no longer provide these items for his addiction, but I did give them to him when I didn't know any better.
Yeah, this requires a very strong skill set. This is a severe addiction. And one of the reasons it's so severe, of course, is because we were attacked by sugar in childhood. And so really at conception, if your parents are eating processed foods at conception, your DNA sequence is turned on to create addiction. And then you're born, your mom is eating sugar, the sugar's coming through the breast milk, or you're on sugary formula. You don't get a break. There's not one day. It's not like a crack baby who gets to go through withdrawal. And then the next brain cell in that new baby's brain is being formed in a not addicted brain. We didn't get that. Every cell in my head until I was 44 years old was created in an addicted brain. So it takes a pretty deep skill set to save a child. It becomes harder when the children have their own money and their own independence and they can go get it themselves, but not impossible. There are strategies. So I'll give you one example. Is you can say to your children, I want to eat clean I want to eat clean from Monday, or let's say from Sunday to Friday. We're going to eat clean, you're just going to eat the food that I give you. And here's the deal. If you do that, I will get you whatever you want on Saturday morning. Because here's the inside secret. In that 6 days, the children's guts will repopulate. What does that mean? That means that the microorganisms that process sugar and processed foods will die off because they're not being fed. And then comes Saturday, when they put these toxic substances into their bodies, the full toxicity of the substance will reach their brain. The liver has stopped stockpiling enzymes because it doesn't have any reason to stockpile those enzymes because those foods are not coming through the gut. It will hurt. The children will have stomach aches. They'll have headaches. Their whole bodies might ache. They will be depressed. Their worlds will go dark. They will be angry. They will be miserable. And you're just standing by. You're not lecturing them or judging them. And as they express their dismay, you say, wonder if that's from those processed foods or whatever it is they've asked for. So here comes Sunday. They're back on their plan. Now, I admit, they're going to be in withdrawal for 4 days, possibly acute withdrawal. But come the next Saturday, you're like, oh, what do you guys want? I'm going to go get it now. And they ask for it maybe one more time, and you have one more bad Saturday and one more set of 4 days of withdrawal. And then they will forget about it. The next Saturday, you'll have some really fun activity planned for them, not at an amusement park where they're going to be exposed to a lot of triggers, but maybe out in the woods. Maybe you have a nature day planned for them, a float down a river or a walk through a woods, something really soothing. Nature is very soothing. And that's one possible technique.
It is harder when they're older. I asked her if she's giving him the money to buy the drugs, because we know that dairy and sugar are drugs, and she says no, he has a job, so not much she can do. But I wonder, like, if there's something he really wants. Like I was thinking, I used to be addicted to Tab, like it's like Diet Coke, but it was different.
Tab, yeah.
And I used to love it. I used to drink so much of it, and I lived really close to a Carl's Jr., and I'd get like this giant size, and I'd put lime in. And I remember this was like in 1987, and my best friend knew it was really bad, and it is really bad, but it was hard to get off of. And she said to me, she worked for Warner Brothers, And I love wearing Converse tennis shoes. I am vegan, so I wear non-leather shoes. And she had this pair from the movie Batman that she worked on. Like nobody else had them. And she said, if you quit the tab, I will give these to you. And you know, I did it. It was really hard. I had to go to Maui and sit on a beach and cry and have headaches for
Oh,
but I
yes.
did it. But the point was, is like this was not something I could buy. No, these are never, they're never made another pair again. And it was like, and I'm so proud that I did it, but I still have the shoes and I wear them only occasionally because but I'm wondering if there would be a motivator for her son, like maybe, you know, even though he has a part-time job to buy dairy and sugar, maybe there's something he really wants more, like some kind of technology, and that there, you know, because like you're saying, the microbiome gets addicted to it. When I did the GI Health Summit, they were saying it's like, it's not just you that's addicted. Your microbiome is now expecting these drugs. And when they don't get it, they get kind of angry.
Yes, yes. It's a vicious addiction. It affects every cell in the body. So I love what you're saying, Chef AJ, and I'm so glad that worked out for you. I'm so glad you got off the tab. That's a very tough. It's a liquid. It gets into your system more often. It's a combination of sweetener and caffeine.
And I think the
and
artificial
carbonation.
You know, people don't talk about how the artificial sweeteners are just as deleterious to your gut microbiome and just as addictive. They may be 0 calorie, but that doesn't mean they have 0 impact.
No. They cause your pancreas to release insulin, a lot of insulin, when there's no sugar there, which means it's taking out your needed essential sugar, taking it out, putting it into fat cells. Your blood sugar is dropping through the floor, unstable emotions, and intense cravings. It's nasty. Caffeine,
and the thing is in reality, it doesn't taste good. I mean, you think
no, once you get off, it's just like cigarettes.
Cigarettes and even coffee really doesn't taste good.
No.
People think it does. You know, it's like when people say, you know, oh, you know, I love the taste of wine. And then you offer them non-alcoholic wine. They don't love the taste anymore. It's the drug that they love.
These are good examples. I will just say one thing. There is research showing that pain aversion, two of the major forces in the brain. One is a conformance drive or an adherence drive. That's the dominant survival mechanism in the brain. So controlling cueing in the house is really important. In other words, you don't want your children to be seeing images of other people eating processed foods. But the other very, very, very powerful force in the brain is pain aversion. So what you're doing with your children is you're reprogramming their brains so that instead of seeing, you know, a sugary item, oh, that looks so good, they will go straight over to seeing that sugary item and saying, oh, that hurts in this way, and this way. So it's just, it's conditioning, it's retraining brain cells to associate. It's called associative cueing. You want that sugary item for them to associate that with pain. Yeah.
I don't know her kid, but I do know that some teenagers get acne and that when they stop the sugar and it clears up. So sometimes that can motivate somebody that's younger, because you can't really say, you know, you're going to have heart disease, diabetes. They don't care about that.
Right. No. My own kids went through this. They were 11 and 12. And they had their own money, they had their allowance, and their school was packed with processed foods. So my deal for them was, and this is something else, I think it's only fair, if you're going to ask your kids to get off processed foods, that you give them a steady supply of clean foods so that they never have to choose between going hungry or eating something bad. That's not fair. So my kids left the house every morning with a huge bag of all their food for the day. And then I would pick them up and I would sometimes have dinner for them in the car. But the point is that, and they told me this story years later. So I'm sending all this clean food to school, but they're still buying the bad stuff. And the months go by. We start in January. In March, we have a 10-day spring break trip. And my therapist at that time gave me 4 rules for the children. 1, they cannot bring it in the house. 2, they can't eat it in front of me. 3, I'm not going to pay for it and I'm not going to take them to buy it. So two are triggering rules, and the other two are enabling rules. So here we are on this trip. Now they're getting clean. They're in the process because they have so much clean food with them all the time. They're definitely eating less of the bad foods, but they're also stabilizing off the good foods. That's another tip. Give them the list of clean foods and tell them, please circle all the clean foods that you like. And then make sure that those foods are in the house in abundance. And there are lots of dishes that that are clean just naturally. Like chili is clean.
Mhm.
It's soups tend to be clean if you don't have noodles in them. Soups tend to be clean. So a lentil soup would be something that they wouldn't expect to have sugar in anyway, or flour or dairy.
You never know with the processed food industry. They put it where it's
No,
not even needed. They put it in tomato sauce. I mean, they put it in places that doesn't even need it.
but here's your other weapon is your crock pot. And I'll tell you why, because smells are a massive cue. Smells are the strongest cue. If your house is always full of the smell of clean food, you are manipulating your children. You're fighting back against the manipulation of the processed food industry. You're manipulating your children's brains to think about clean food.
Yeah.
It's a battle. You're battling the smartest. I mean, people go into neurology PhDs so that they can be hired at exorbitant amounts of money to do exactly this for consumer companies.
Yeah, I know that's the part that's diabolical. And you've talked about Howard Moskowitz, who I tried to interview, but I know somebody that knows him, but I don't think he really wants to do an interview. He's basically said, well, I had to feed my family,
Amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's not really a word for it. Callousness, insensitivity, that doesn't even begin to cover this. This is just, I'm here with you. I'm safe here with you. I can use this word, evil.
Yeah, absolutely. Jerry, when she was watching your presentation, said this is so disgusting. It's maddening that they're able to get away from this. Rachel has a really good question. She said, where is the pharmaceutical industry in all this? Because if you watched my show on Sunday with Dr. Eric Walsh, he said the pharmaceutical industry was just a response to the diseases created by the processed food industry.
It's hand in glove. It's hand in glove. Why don't doctors know about this? Why aren't doctors on our side fighting this tooth and nail? It's because they're trained by the pharmaceutical industry. Their hospitals depend on surgeries and pharmaceuticals in order to make enough money to keep the hospital open. So they develop stories, myths. Oh, it's too hard to get people to change. No, that is not the problem. The right programs are not being presented to these patients. You need a surround program to block out all those triggers that we've been talking about from the food industry. You need very consistent, available other messaging. You are strong, you are powerful, you think clearly, you make brilliant choices, so that your brain absorbs that and starts to believe that about you, instead of the messaging that comes out of media, because media is another complicit industry, which is, oh, people don't want to change. Oh, people don't like exercising. Oh, people lack willpower. Oh, people are too stressed out. None of that is true. It's messaging designed to keep you on edge and craving.
So, Dr. Ifland, one of the live viewers is asking about if you could summarize what happened with trans fats, because the FDA actually did ban them because they were harmful. Why can't they do that with some of these other substances?
I think because I think, I don't know the story well enough. I know what you're saying is accurate. How did trans fats get out of our, maybe because there was a good substitute. Maybe there was a substitute that was more addictive than trans fats. Like there could be the vegetable oil industry. Yeah. Ban those trans fats and let's get back to vegetable oils. So my guess is, you guys know I have an MBA from Stanford way back, but business dynamics, you saw that whole presentation we just did on business tactics. You look at, oh, well, who profited from trans fats being banned? Plus, they are just really obviously destructive. Yeah.
So we have a question from Tammy. Can you talk about caffeine? And that's also a very, I once heard that if caffeine and sugar were discovered today, they would be controlled substances.
Oh, totally. They were all grandfathered in at the beginning of the controlled substance, or the beginning of the FDA. Substances or foods in common use. I forget the acronym. Substances in common use. I don't remember, but there's a common use criteria, and if the substance was in common use, then it just got grandfathered in. Nobody did the testing. So sugar and caffeine got in under that. It's awful.
And they're often together. They're almost always together, sugar and caffeine, aren't they? Tea.
Yeah. Sodas,
energy drinks, which energy drinks is the worst name for them because they do the opposite.
They exhaust you.
They should call them exhaustion drinks.
Yes, Chef AJ, they should call them exhaustion drinks.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Asking why do the elderly always seem to crave sweets? I used to work in assisted livings, and that's true, but I think every age craves it. It's natural.
Well, so addictions are progressive. This is something that I love talking about. And people think that they're getting sicker because they're getting older. No. You are not getting sicker because you're getting older. You're getting sicker because processed food consequences are getting worse. They're piling up on each other, and now they're starting to aggravate each other. So, your joint pain at age 29 is not because you're getting older. Your diabetes is not getting worse because you're getting older. You're not gaining weight because you're getting older. Your depression is not getting worse because you're getting older. Your fatigue is not getting worse because you're getting older. All of those things are happening because the consequences, the illnesses, the pain caused by processed foods are piling up. And it's so much fun to work with older people, get them off the processed foods, and see them feel 20, 30 years younger. And the joint pain goes away, and the fatigue goes away, and the brain fog goes away, and the difficulty breathing goes away, and the difficulty sleeping goes away, and it's really fun to take older people off of processed foods. I turned 70 last year. In a couple of months, I will turn 71. My mental agility is better than it's ever been because I am in a recovery community, and we do focus on mental capabilities. And so I do those exercises, and I just wrote a really complicated paper about how if you give a food plan to somebody who hasn't been diagnosed or treated for severe addiction to food, you could make the addiction worse. That was a very complicated paper. It's probably got 60 or 70 citations. It's built on research. It took me months to write it. But here I am, 70 years old. I think I'm going to have my next 2 decades of work are going to be my best work. My decade of being 70 and my decade of being 80. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't have anything wrong with me. I discovered breath work last year, and that was the final piece I needed to resolve my asthma that I've had since I was a small child. I've done a lot of emotional processing work, some movement work, and then boom, the breath work on top of that. I worked with my physician to get off an inhaler that I've used for decades, and it's working. I need to go in and get tested, but my feeling is I don't have asthma anymore. So you can resolve. We're starting to call in our community, we're starting to call it radical remission of diabetes and heart disease markers. And we even are working on some cancer cases where There's an incredible book called Radical Remission by Kelly Tucker. She did her doctoral work. You should get her on, actually, Chef AJ. She did her doctoral, she did a PhD, she did her doctoral work going around the world asking people who put advanced cancer into remission what they did.
I tried to contact her and she's never gotten back to me. I read her book. I loved her book.
Well, we don't give advice on supplements, but we're doing the other 8 things. Decreasing negative thinking, increasing positive thinking, providing socializing, putting people in touch with their instincts. And of course, at the top of her list is radical changes in your diet. So these are things that can be put into remission in the right environment with the right food plan and the right support for that food plan. Because if you just give somebody a food plan and you don't treat the addiction, they could get actually worse. You've got to treat the addiction. You've got to reprogram. You've got to provide space where people can easily change the messaging that's circling around in their heads.
Wow. So here's the $1 million question from, who wrote it? I wrote their name down, Terry. So how do we break the addiction?
Okay. So this is classic drug addiction recovery. Well, you do need to find a community. And I know Chef AJ has communities, I have communities. You need to find a community because the part of the brain that will always work great is your adherence drive, where you will helplessly copy the behavior of the people around you. So if you are around healthy people, you will find yourself able to do things that you maybe hadn't been able to do for decades. So January 1st, 2018, I had turned in the textbook manuscript 6 months before. I knew it was a severe addiction and that we're deeply traumatized over it. And I knew that a severe addiction needs community, it needs compassion, it needs brain retraining, it needs more brain retraining, it needs relationship management, it needs like problem resolution. It needs a particular set of things that normally for severe addiction, you would go to a residential facility for a couple of years. And you know, we're not sending hundreds of millions of people to residential facilities. And it doesn't work for food addiction because you just come home and your home is a big binge trigger. So people are relapsing from these very expensive $50,000 5-week stays. They're relapsing within days. That is not your fault. You were not conditioned to go home to a safe, secure, calm environment. No, everybody's missed you for 5 weeks. They're all pissed. They're all mad because you've been away and they had to do your jobs. No, of course you're going to be relapsing within a couple of days. That is not your fault. It's the wrong program. So what I saw that and I said, the next level of treatment down from residential is called intensive outpatient, IOP, where you go to the hospital 5 days a week for 4 or 5 hours. And I thought to myself, maybe we could provide IOP, but how would we provide that service? How would we get the service to people? And boom, late 2017, Zoom came along. I said, I wonder if we could provide these services over Zoom. So I had a daily phone call at that time, and I got the people from my daily phone call to volunteer. And we had our first full day. I didn't have much experience with Zoom. I didn't know that it's not reasonable to stay on Zoom as a host for the full day. But I did it, and we did it for 7 days. So I had people who had been trying for decades to have one clean day. And at the beginning of the day, they were nervous. Oh, I can't wear a measure because it will just trigger me into restricting. oh, I can't get off these foods today because I'll be triggered into binging. And I'm like, no worries, no worries. Don't push yourself, because I knew that stress causes relapse. At the end of the day, I went around the room. How'd you guys do today? I ate clean. Yeah, I had a clean day. Oh, I ate clean too. I nearly fell off my chair. That was 22 years into my quest to find a reliable way to get people off of processed foods. And I had tried 14 really intensive things to get people off of processed foods. But it wasn't until I was in the middle of the textbook that I realized why none of them had worked. It's because a severe addiction really needs almost 24-hour access to a group. And today, 4.5 years later, we're broadcasting 17 hours out of 24 around the world with expert help. So our hosts, our ARC, the name of the group is the ARC, the Addiction Reset Community. Our ARC managers are trained in compassion and science and respect and techniques to let the person see that they have excellent answers and restore that self-reliance, the instinct, the self-trust, the self-liking. You know, I said to myself the other day, what is our primary purpose? It's to get people to be happy with themselves. Because if you really like yourself, that the idea of causing pain by eating that thing, it just stops making any sense at all. It's a very natural, relaxed process. But the worst mistake you can make is to underestimate what it takes to recover from a severe addiction.
Yeah. And that's what, you know, I've always said, you know, you've got to clean up your environment. People are saying, well, my spouse doesn't support me. Then you got to get a marriage counselor to figure out how to get your spouse to support you. Because, I mean, you know, like you talked about cueing, how is somebody going to recover in an unclean environment? Well, first of all, they don't take the addiction seriously, but it's like, it's just, I just wish people would understand that the people that suffer terribly. And that's why, in addition to having a clinician like yourself on every day, I'm also having a person that suffers from food addiction. Some of them have found the way out, some are in progress. But I was asking yesterday, had a very poignant guest on who suffered for so many years. And I wonder, and you could probably address this, and I'm sure Dr. Joel Fuhrman, who's coming on Saturday, can, because he wrote a book called Fast Food Genocide. But do you think that eating these foods just impairs the decision-making part of your brain so that it makes it harder to stop?
There are two pieces. Chef AJ, as usual, you are right on the topic. There are two pieces. One, you have intense cravings in your head. But two, that hyperactivity in the craving area of the brain is pulling the blood supply away from your frontal lobe. And that means that you don't have attention span, learning, decision-making, impulse control, emotional processing, and memory. Those are frontal lobe functions. And so it's two pieces. One, you have these intense cravings. And two, the addiction has taken away your braking system. So if Chef AJ and I can collaborate on this, I will come back at another time and I will show you part 2 of that presentation, and you will see how the brain functions. And when you see how the brain functions, you will really, really, really know this is not your fault. It has nothing to do with willpower, because your frontal lobe is not getting blood supply.
Well, everybody is saying in the chat they want you to come back, so let's talk offline and get you on as soon as possible. Oh, I've got to thank Susanna for a super chat donation. She said, thank you for the wonderful support, Chef AJ and Dr. Ifland. You've changed my life. Susanna has been on my channel. She's one of these people that like got the information and ran with it. And now she has 8 children though, and they're pretty much all grown up. And it's, you know, she wishes she knew this information before.
Me too. I wish my parents had known this information. Yeah.
Well, those that know it, let's stop this now.
Vote with your dollars. Don't buy the darn stuff. Don't buy the darn stuff. Yeah, and don't buy it for other people. It's disease carrying. It's like a mosquito that has malaria.
Yep. Josh is commenting, processed foods are as addictive as drugs, even more so. I just want to thank you, not only for your work, but for your graciousness and kindness towards me, because I feel like I don't fit in anywhere, because I don't really fit in the food addiction world because I'm vegan. And a lot of them think that you can't recover if you're vegan. And then I don't really fit in the vegan world because I'm against vegan processed foods. So I got nowhere to go.
No, you're here with me, Chef AJ. In our community, we embrace, we cherish, we hold up, we sympathize with, we walk with vegans, plant-based. You've been gaslighted in other communities. You've been rejected by professionals who are not competent enough to care for you. And Chef AJ, you belong with me.
Thank you. Well, you are just one of my favorites, and I cannot wait for you to come back and give part 2 of this talk. We have something to look forward to.
Thank you.
Thank
I appreciate
so much
you.
And you look amazing, and not just for 70, but for any age. So
I know. I keep getting younger. Really, thanks to being in this community, I'm doing more exercise, and it is amazing. Now that the asthma is in remission, I have nothing wrong with it. I have some osteoporosis or osteopenia in my spine. That's it.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I can't wait for you to come back, Dr. Ifland.
I can't wait to come back. Thanks, Chef Adrian.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back at 2 p.m. when we have a wonderful success story. Rebecca Martinez suffered with processed food addiction for over 50 years and finally got a hold of it and has lost 200 pounds and looks and feels amazing. You don't want to miss that show.